This episode of the Danger Close podcast is brought to you by Cry Havoc. From New York Times #1 best-selling author, Jack Carr. Cry Havoc, a Tom Reece thriller. Order now.
We got back to the LZ for extraction, and gunships came over so low, their ejected 7.62 brass was falling upon us, and I actually got a hot brass down my shirt. For a split second, I felt that burn. I thought I might have been hit, but I wasn't.
It is so great to see you, and it's such an honor for me to be able to talk to you.
And that is absolutely mutual. I admire you both for your service, and damn, you're a hell of a writer.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. I have this right here. I read this as soon as it came out. I was a brand new Navy SEAL, and that's when and I think this is the first book solely focused on Macv-Sog. Anyway, right?
Yes, sir.
And soon after the missions were, I don't know if all missions were, but the unit was declassified. And
25 years after the fact.
Wow, incredible. Incredible. And I remember reading this as a brand new SEAL and just in awe of everything that you guys did.
There are a lot of fine men in that book, and it was my privilege to serve with them.
Oh, just incredible. Just incredible. And I'm trying to remember where I first heard about Macv-Sog, and it's possible that it came from the pages of, do you remember Brigade Quartermaster?
Of course.
And what was the other one? It was Brigade Quartermaster and U.S. Cavalry.
Yes,
those were like the two.
Memory.
It's getting a little they're back there. Exactly, especially when they're not arriving every quarter like they used to when I was in junior high and high school. But I remember they had either the SOG knife or commemorative knife or Macv-Sog commemorative knife, and it was $350. Which might as well have been $3 million back then. As a kid, I'm not getting that knife, no matter how many times I ask my parents for it.
I think that was Al Marr who designed.
Okay.
Who was former Special Forces, but I don't know that he was in SOG. But a good guy.
Yeah, I remember those Al Marr knives. Those were extremely popular. And of course, I was aware of Army Special Forces from popular culture, of course, the book, the Green Berets, and the song, and the John Wayne movie. And by the time I'm that age, we have First Blood already. I read the book shortly thereafter by David Morrell. Rambo First Blood Part 2 comes out in 1985. So I'm aware of Army Special Forces, and I know that I'm going into special operations, and I'm getting U.S. Cavalry and Brigade Quartermaster and Soldier of Fortune magazine when my dad will grab one off a newsstand and sneak it to me because my mom didn't love Soldier of Fortune magazine. But
and look what terrible influence it had.
Exactly. And now I have the full collection upstairs. Yeah, I'm so proud that I have the full collection of Soldier of Fortune magazines. So I'm doing everything I can possibly do in the early 80s, all the way through the 80s, to study everything I can on special operations. And back then, you were focused on Vietnam. That was really obviously the watershed moment in special operations history, whether it was no matter what branch of the military you're in. But I want to start off by just saying thank you for taking, as you can tell, I'm so excited to talk to you.
And that's mutual, of course.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And I maybe start off by your path into the Army. Did you grow up with stories of World War II and watching those World War II films? Were there any World War II veterans in your life, books that you read? What was your path into the Army in general?
Well, number one, I grew up in Northeast Minneapolis, where there was a large population. We called them Scandinavians, which means Norwegians and Swedes and Finns. And the Norwegians in particular were impressed by the Norwegian resistance. Very inspiring. And of course, there were World War II movies that they put on TV by then. You don't see them much now, but they were all, to me, inspiring. And I had a few relatives that had fought in World War II, and I thought that was a proper thing to do. Vietnam arose. I was a high school senior, and I started pumping iron. I was lightweight. I had a 29-inch waist, but I started pumping iron. I started studying Shotokan karate because I knew that I'd be going, and I actually joined right out of high school. Still 17 years old, volunteered initially for airborne infantry because I didn't want to be a leg. Right. And there were some paratroopers that influenced me. Prior to that, I thought it would have been great to be a Marine.
Yep.
But nevertheless, once I arrived at jump school, having completed the infantry part, I had a chance to volunteer for Special Forces. Well, I was 18, which was a year too young. And I managed to convince the recruiter that if I passed this very complicated test and all the other prelims, that he'd seriously consider me. And I did. I passed everything. And he pointed out again that I was too young. And I've been good at BSing my way through problems before. And I said, but I'll be 19 when I graduate. He said, yeah, I guess so. Boom, get on the bus. That's kidding. How I got into Special Forces.
Wow. And you were a gun guy growing up, right? You were reading everything you could possibly find on weapons?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. And I was a shooter. I had a lot of influence from one of my high school teachers who was a shooter and an archery hunter. And I learned that shooting is a serious skill from him. He was a Korean vet and a paratrooper.
The book starts with a quote from Ernest Hemingway. "There is no hunting like the hunting of man, and those who have hunted armed men long enough and liked it never care for anything else thereafter." Savage Son, the third novel in my James Reece Terminal List series, is a novel that I've wanted to write since the 6th grade, when we read a short story called The Most Dangerous Game by Richard Connell, first published in 1924. It is really a book about the dark side of man, told through the dynamic of hunter and hunted. And even back then, at 11 years old, I told myself that one day, when I got out of the military, I would write a modern-day thriller that paid tribute to that short story. And I wanted it to be my first novel. But as I put all these different ideas down on the table, it was very clear to me that I needed to start with the Terminal List because the characters weren't yet to a place where I could explore the themes that I explore in Savage Son. So wrote the Terminal List, and still at the end of the Terminal List, James Reece wasn't quite there yet. Then he goes through this story of violent redemption in True Believer, and at the end of True Believer, I knew that he was now at a place where I could explore the themes of Savage Son. Book number 3. All right, there are a lot of different weapons, pistols, rifles, shotguns, blades, all sorts of things in the pages of my novels. And in Savage Son, he carries P320. And in this passage right here, "You always wanted to live in Robin's guest house," Rafe smiled, referring to his father's middle name and knowing his friend would get it. "I'm sure he'll put you to work sooner or later and make you earn your keep, so if I were you, I'd play sick for as long as possible." Good tip. Reach under the seat. Reece reached down and pulled out a SIG P320 X Compact in a Black Point Tactical mini-wing holster. "Maddo thought that might come in handy," Rafe said, referring to their former command master chief, who now ran the training academy for 6 Hour. "Does everyone know I'm back?" Reece asked. "You know this community, brother," Rafe said with a smile. "We're worse than old ladies in a sewing circle." So in Savage Son, James Reece picks up the SIG P320 X Compact right here. But if there were some other versions available, like this right here, and this is a P320, but it is customized by the guys at True Precision. Look at that. Now that is a sweet pistol. So maybe he would have carried something like this had I known about them back then, or perhaps something from the custom shop. You can go on the Sig Sauer website and check out their custom shop and make something like this right here. So that's a P365, and you can go on there and choose the grip mod. You can choose the barrel, the slide, the magazine, the optic, and build yourself a custom pistol just like this one. So if that had existed back then, that might have been in James Reece's hands as well.
And I learned it was a serious skill that, like any skill, you have to practice to master.
Oh, that's the power of having mentors in your life, especially as a young kid between those ages, let's say of, I don't know, 8 through 18, right in there.
Thank God important. It wasn't a crack dealer.
I know. See, it could go the other way as well.
No, I don't think I would have gone that way.
No.
But, God.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. To have that influence, to go in knowing you don't want to be a dirty, nasty leg, as they say. And I think by that time I got to jump school also at Fort Benning. I don't think the curriculum had changed much. It was still 3 days crammed into 3 weeks.
Correct, yes. Well,
so I think it was very similar, and yours was probably very similar to the guys who had gone through a decade or more before you. Still the towers, still all all those things, still the same probably techniques for your parachute landing fall.
Yes.
So you go through that, and when is the first time you start hearing about Army Special Forces?
Well, believe it or not, I had a Special Forces brochure.
Oh, nice.
In about 1962.
Okay.
And I'd already thought through, if I ended up in the military, I wanted to do something where I counted. I wasn't going to be part of a mass, but I'd have some, maybe you get killed, but at least you could have some influence on your fate.
Yeah.
And I was writing something for school, and I contacted Fort Bragg, and I obtained this brochure about Special Forces. And I thought, wow, to fight smart and to do things behind enemy lines, that is really the way to fight.
Yep. You know, those things, those pamphlets, stickers, those things. I remember being in, I think, first grade or second grade, where someone in my class had an older brother who was in high school that was joining the Marine Corps. And I remember she brought to school, and I remember in a school assembly, she gave me a Marine Corps sticker that her brother had gotten from the recruiter. And I thought that was just the most amazing thing. Just so cool. So it's interesting how those just little touch points like that, a pamphlet, a brochure, a conversation, a film, the power of popular culture. We had this by the time I got to, I think I was a freshman in high school. And this book had come out. So this came out in the mid 80s, the Hans Halberstadt Green Beret Unconventional Warrior book.
I think I have it.
I'm sure you do. And I remember reading this, and I was trying to remember. I grabbed it before I came in here, and I did a quick scan to see if Macv-Sog was mentioned, and I didn't see it. So I don't think I heard about Macv-Sog from this, but this is the same time that I'm reading Soldier of Fortune and going through U.S. Cavalry Magazine and Brigade Quartermaster and all that. But I've read this book so many times and looked at these photos constantly. Just so impressed. Die Oppressor Liber, right there. And just so impressed with what these guys did, their training, their history. And this was very influential on me right here. But,
and what was fabulous is once I got to Bragg and I was going through training, I came upon some of the World War II veterans.
Oh, wow.
And later in SOG, some of our senior leaders were World War II Special Operations veterans. But at Fort Bragg, we actually had a vet I met from Merrill's Marauders.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Just, that's inspiring just to hear them speak.
Oh, well, it's the same for my generation, for being able to talk to guys like you. And we get to the SEAL teams, and most of the Vietnam veterans, by the time I got to my first team in 97, were already out, unless they had a break in service, or unless they were an admiral or something like that, or very senior, maybe senior enlisted at that time. But if some guys had a break in service, maybe in the 70s into the early 80s, and then they came back in. So those were the guys that we got to interact with. And it was just always such such an honor when they said anything about their time in Southeast Asia, and we just hung on every single word. A lot of people don't really think about it this way, but we hadn't really been in sustained combat since Vietnam, since the end of Vietnam. So from the end of Vietnam all the way to September 11th, we had those flashpoints. For some units, it was maybe Desert One and the lessons from that led to the creation of new commands and special operations. We had Grenada, Panama, we had Desert, the first Gulf War, still very, still fairly quick as far as wars go, Mogadishu, but those were the ones. And changing tactics, techniques, and procedures based off a flashpoint might not necessarily be the best thing to do, but sustained combat operations, that was Vietnam, and that's all those lessons learned were what we carried through all the way and still use today. But then September 11th happened, and of course now we're not fighting in the jungles really, we're in the mountains of Afghanistan, the streets of Iraq, and we shift some tactics, techniques, and procedures from there. But so you're in jump school, and where do you find out that you have the opportunity to now volunteer, try out for Army Special Forces?
During late in week 2 of jump school, a Special Forces recruiter came through. Wow. And I later learned his name because I served in group with him. His name was Panic, but a big lug Texan with a green beret walked through and said, if any of you were interested, Special Forces, come talk to me. Mm-hmm. And that is, he was the one who interviewed me, and eventually I ended up in Special Forces.
No kidding. And you, I forget, did you do commo school while you're in SF or before?
This is interesting. I was a gun guy from when I was like 9 years old.
Yeah.
In fact, this is boastful. I outshot all my friends because to me, to learn to shoot well was important. Mm-hmm. So there's a full colonel commander of training group at Fort Bragg, and you're going to decide which of the 5 specialties you're going to train in. It could have been weapons, which was my first choice, of course, commo, demo, medic, or operations and intelligence. So the colonel says, "Oh, son, what are you interested in? What training do you want?" I said, "Weapons, sir." I said, "I have got small arms of the world, and I've studied it since I was a child," and blah, blah, blah. He said, "You'll make an excellent commo man." And I said, "Well, sir, I'd rather have weapons." He said, "Well, you have all that background already. Let's get you qualified as a commo man." And that was it. It was eyewash for them to interview you. You were going to go wherever they needed you. But
exactly.
At least the courtesy of the commander talking to.
Exactly. That's fantastic. And I had a similar thing happen. I wanted to be a point man. And because you're reading all the books about Vietnam and everything there. So you want to be that first person. You want to be the point man. Most guys did anyway when they show up at the team. And I had that similar thing happen. You're going to make a great commo guy. So I went to commo school, which I actually liked because it actually worked out really well, because as a comm guy, as you know, then you are in that mission planning process. And really all aspects of that mission planning process as a very junior person in the military. So that paid dividends later on when I became an officer. And also didn't have to ask anyone how to program my Embed radio or anything like that. It wasn't helpless. I could do my own, or I could help out with those parts, or even like mentor a new comm guy along. So it was actually fairly beneficial. So you do comm and you go right into, did they call it the Q course back then? And what year is this?
They called it phases. Phase 1 was kind of like buds, that if you didn't belong there, they were going to get you out of there. Very physical, a lot of sleep deprivation, food deprivation, marching. I remember one time that I was so tired, and we had to be in a hell of a hurry in order to make our time at our objective. And we stopped at one point. I looked over at a bush, and I thought it was a guy, one of our guys. So I talked to it. We made it. That's the important.
Nice. There you go.
But it was designed. Sure, they were instructing things, but it was designed as much to send you away or get you to quit. It had as much to do with making life difficult enough that those guys who couldn't take it, they were not physically drained actually, but they'd say, "I'm not going to take this anymore." Well, isn't that the shits? Bye. tease them. They'd offer them fried chicken. Hey, go ahead. You don't need to eat that crap. Here, you can have some fried chicken.
Yeah.
Well, some of those guys quit, and within a day, they're regretting it. But when the chips are down, those are the guys you don't want on your team.
Exactly. I mean, very similar to SEAL training. I remember guys quitting in droves, especially that first night of Hell Week. And some people in the line in the surf zone, you have your arms linked. And I know you've seen all the photos and all that. And people are just quitting in droves. And some people in that line would say, come back, don't quit. And I remember just keeping my mouth pretty much shut because it shows the program is working. And that's what you're there for. 80% of these people aren't going to make it. And it shows that this is working. But very, very similar.
I resolved in training that, in SF training, that I was either going to make it or I was going to die. There was nothing in between.
Exactly. And I thought the exact same thing. And then you guys really helped me because I'm lying there in that surf zone and people are quitting and you're freezing and you think, oh my gosh, I have another 4.5 days of this or whatever it is. And I thought, you know what? This isn't nearly as difficult as what those guys did in Vietnam over the fence. Because I had met some Project Delta guys earlier in life. Right. They talked to me about some of those missions and putting phone taps, or I don't know if you call it a phone tap, but wire taps on the Ho Chi Minh Trail on the wires and that stuff. And I thought, you know what? I'm not on a 2-man team hidden beside a trail as a division of NVA soldiers is walking by, or I'm not outgunned like that running to a helo extract. And I thought back to World War II and what those guys did going over the beaches in Normandy and Iwo Jima. And I thought, you know what? I can handle this a little while longer here, trying to achieve my dream on the beach in Coronado, California. So I thought back to those. I thought back to what you guys had done in Vietnam and then our predecessors in World War II. Introducing the BCM Mark 15 timepiece, rugged, purpose-built, American design, Swiss made, engineered for precision and unwavering reliability. A flat sapphire crystal with dual-layer anti-reflective coating ensures clarity under any conditions. Its unidirectional 60-minute bezel delivers dependable performance when timing counts. Equipped with a satin stainless steel bracelet featuring a secure deployment clasp, Super Luminova X1 illuminates the hand's numerals and hour markers, offering visibility you can trust. With 200 meters of water resistance, the Mark 15 is built to endure. Each model is limited to just 200 pieces worldwide. Available now at BravoCompanyUSA.com. So you go through that training, and when do you first hear about SOG? Because it was very secretive, even within Special Forces circles.
It was absolutely secretive. Even mentioning the name in the context of Special Forces was classified. But in training, hear a little bit about rumors, just vague rumors about guys running to put in B-52 strikes on the ground somewhere. And if you actually asked someone, one of these senior NCOs or officers, hey, what is SOG? They'd say, don't know, even though they'd served at SOG. It was not until I was in Vietnam, I signed a 5th Special Forces group, and I had volunteered for SOG, and I did not know what it was. All I knew was the night before I'd been in the NCO club with a friend who already was in SOG, and he said, this is the stuff you volunteered for Special Forces to do. He said, you're probably going to get killed, but you may as well do this because you'll get a good deal out of it.
Wow. When you first flew into Vietnam, where did you land? Do you remember the first place that you landed?
Cam Ranh Bay.
In Cam Ranh Bay. What was it like when the doors open or whatever kind of plane you're in, hatch goes down, whatever it is? What does that feel like and smell like? What's your first impression of Vietnam when you walk off that plane?
Well, Cam Ranh Bay was, as the bay implies, it was right on the ocean. So you had the smell of the ocean, which is probably a stench from rotting seaweed, I would guess. And it was like opening an oven compared to having been stateside. It was wintertime in the States. So it was welcome to Vietnam. And as a new guy, I almost was keeping my eyes open for snipers or something, getting off the plane. And then it was a short drive up to Nha Trang, which is where 5th Special Forces Group was there, and Special Forces well before conventional troops. So it's like they had first pick of where to put their headquarters. I'm sure they had some vague justification, but it was at Nha Trang, which was a seaside resort town with excellent restaurants. So, we got up to Nha Trang, and that's where I was in the NCO club talking to my buddy, and which incidentally, he was showing me this new knife, and he cut his hand seriously. Well, he was drunk.
Oh, yeah.
It was a Puma White Hunter. I even remember that.
Oh, wow.
It's a great knife, but very sharp.
Okay.
And he was the one who recommended it. And this is funny. The next day, we were to receive our assignments. We'd already done all the in-processing, and this rear echelon admin type came walking through and he gave each guy a 3x5 card. And he started revealing, well, where are you going? Where are you going? Where are you going? And my good buddy, Glenn Uemura, Hawaiian American, solid as they come, and also serious martial artist. But they get to Glenn, and Glenn had been with me in the club, and his said CCN. And then they got over to me, and I said, which I had read mine, it said Signal Company, because I was good at it. So I just crushed it up, held it in my hand, and I said, well, I'm supposed to go to CCN with Glenn. The guy just writes down CCN, hands it to me, and that's the end of that.
Oh, you did have a way with the words. That's
Yeah, well, you got to think quick.
got to be quick on your feet. Wow, that's amazing. Was that NCO club you went to? Was that the Project Delta club?
Yes, it was. Absolutely. They had the best club in SFOB, Special Forces base.
That's what I've read. That's what I've heard. So I incorporated it in my next novel. So my next novel focuses on Macv-Sog, even though it's fictional. But I go back in time. So my protagonist is contemporary James Reece, but this is his dad, and this is 1968.
So he wasn't killed at the end of this book.
well, we don't know because I'm going back in time, so I'm kind of leaving it out there. But
yeah, because I'm down to the last 100 pages. So
I'm not gonna. I shouldn't say anything else. Maybe that's why. Maybe that's why I'm going back to 1968 for the dad, because he doesn't make it through. It's possible. But there's also that. I remember you can find it online. There's a black and white interview with Ian Fleming, and he's in GoldenEye, Jamaica. And it's early 60s, maybe late 50s, but I think early 60s. And a reporter asks him, Mr. Fleming, would you ever consider killing off James Bond in one of your novels? And he has that, that cigarette and that holder, and he takes that puff and he says, my dear chap, I couldn't possibly afford it. so I would guess that James Reece will live on, but this one's his dad, 1968, Vietnam. He's on his third deployment to Vietnam, and he's working with Macv-Sog. So I'm trying to get it as, so if one of you guys reads it, I want you to know that I at least put in the time, energy, and effort to try to capture the feelings of that time.
Oh, I appreciate, yes. And I can see the degree to which you do your research. You taught me a whole lot, especially about medical issues.
Well, those ones are tough because I wasn't a medic. So what I do is I write the chapter as best I can, and then I'll send it off to some special operations medics and say, hey, can you take a look at this? Or if it's a level of care above that at a doctor, the surgery with the doctor and that sort of a thing, I'll send it to a surgeon and say, hey, if another surgeon was to read this, I want them to at least know that I put in the effort to try to get it right. So I do that with the plane. In the beginning of that book, I learned as much as I could about that Lake Buccaneer aircraft, which I learned about from a book by a Special Operations Vietnam veteran, J.C. Pollock, who wrote Centrifuge and Mission MIA back in the 80s. And so I told myself, reading that book in the mid 80s, 1985, summer of 1985, I still have my original paperback. And I told myself that one day I'd write a thriller that had that plane in it. And so that was the book that you have right there. So the special operations ties go back a long way. But when you get then to CCN, are you assigned as a commo guy up there first, or what are you doing first?
Well, you're kind of in a holding pattern until they figure out, at least for about a week, till they figure out where to put you. And you haven't been briefed yet. We were personally briefed, the 5 or so of us that came in together, by Colonel Jack Warren, who was the commander of CCN.
Quite a character, as I...
Oh, a hell of a character. He had his ups and he had his downs, but he was a real character. So he comes into this briefing room, this big map on the wall covered with a curtain. It says top secret. And he comes in. He's got his beret on. He's got a cigarette holder. He's smoking a cigarette. He's wearing a black windbreaker, which we called 10 jackets because 10's got them. And it'd have your patch and your name and so on it. He came in, he said, "Welcome to CCN." And he threw open that screen, and I'm looking for Vietnam. And part of Vietnam is way over here at one side. I looked at it. My God, that's Laos. And right away, he started identifying where some teams were already. This one's on road watch. This one is on a prisoner snatch, etc. And I just went, initially, wow, I have really lucked out. This is where I really wanted to be. Only later did I realize that dangerous, hazardous special operations come with casualties. I never regretted volunteering, but boy, there was a great cost to pay among my friends.
Yeah. And for those listening, can you explain the relationship between the United States, South Vietnam, North Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia? Laos was supposed to be neutral, but not
it was
really.
On paper.
Exactly, on paper. But of course, the trails are leading down from North Vietnam into South Vietnam.
Right.
And can you explain what that was all about? So we were not supposed to be in Laos or Cambodia.
Right. Admiral Harriman, great American negotiator, had negotiated the withdrawal of some American advisors from Laos, which we had like 100 special forces there under Project White Star. And the North Vietnamese were supposed to withdraw theirs. Well, our guys, the International Control Commission, had everyone's name. They check it off when they got on the plane. And the North Vietnamese said, well, we'll just handle our own because we're bringing them back across our own. They never withdrew. As of 59, they had started, way back in 1959, constructing the trail system that we later called the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And as of 63 or 64, they had bulldozers there. Eventually, they had 2,500 miles of road that they sent supply convoys over. And at any given time, if they were able to replace them quickly enough, they had up to 10,000 trucks in Laos, which is this neutral country guaranteed by Admiral Harriman. And the U.S. government doesn't want to really push it, that whether or not, because they negotiated in Geneva and so on. Yeah. So the only way to go take a look and find out exactly where the enemy was and what he was up to was to put people cross-border. Initially, Vietnamese, that lasted about a month. They most of them were lost. They just didn't have the expertise. Starting the fall of 65, we began running special forces, American special forces laid missions. In fact, it was the same week as the operation that became the movie.
We Were Soldiers Once and Young.
We Were Soldiers Once and Young, yes. So that same week, started putting Americans over there. But again, they didn't want, the United States government did not want to say, well, we reserve the right to recon areas that are threatening our, no. They were denied. They were deniable operations. Any relationship, they were top secret, limited distribution. Any relationship between any American forces and going cross-border was denied. And 5th Special Forces Group was headquartered at Nha Trang. Macv-Sog was headquartered in Saigon because it was close to the headquarters of U.S. MACV, Military Assistance Command. And we worked for those folks. We got our pay and promotions through 5th Group, but operationally, we were controlled by SOG headquarters in Saigon. If we went to Saigon, let's say for a debrief, we had to shed anything that looked like special forces. We looked like just a bunch of legs wearing baseball caps. so that there was no visual connection between SOG and Special Forces.
Okay. And when you went to Saigon like that, did you carry that 25, that little cat house gun?
No, I usually carried the serious gun.
Oh, good. Okay.
Which we had concealed carry authorized.
Did you carry Browning High Power or 1911?
Darn right. Nice. Which that was a general issue gun, but when it came right down to it, you could carry anything you wanted. Nobody would have blinked about it. But I liked the Browning. I'd owned one and shot one before I joined the Army as a 17-year-old.
Wow.
But I liked the high power, and you know, you under a jungle shirt, the way it hangs loose, no problemo.
Love it. I think you'll like my next book. I can't wait to send it to you. Called Cry Havoc. So the Browning high power features prominently in there.
Great piece, except you had to be legal Geneva Convention. You had to fire hardball. In 9mm, well, as I experienced at one time shooting a bad guy, 9mm, and it's not like shooting a 45, and it's not like shooting a soft point. It tended to poke holes through. It was relatively low velocity, and you could even hit someone several times. They weren't necessarily really done. They might go down, but they aren't dead.
Is that when you came back from that mission and I think a colonel or somebody came in to talk to you and asked how it went, and you said, you're not taking that pistol anymore, you're going to take more magazines for the long gun?
Yes. But it was a Swedish K. 9mm with a suppressor.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And sexy guns, they're really cool, but you got to take something that fits the mission and the environment.
I'm going to ask you specifically about those in a bit, but before we go too much further, can you explain the makeup of the teams, and knowing that for different missions and different areas, there might have been some slight differences, but typically two, maybe a third American, the 1-0, the 1-1, and then Montagnard tribesmen for the most part, some Nungs maybe with others, but can you explain what that team makeup looked like that you'd go into Laos with?
Typically, I liked to go in with 8 men, 3 U.S. and 5 in ditch. And the reason was I'd have enough people, even if we took a serious ambulatory wounded, I had enough people to continue the fight, and 2 guys devoted to extracting our wounded man. The downside of that is, given the altitude we were at, the Central Highlands and over in the Annamite Mountains, it meant you had to go in on 2 Hueys. So one time, it's like if you fire a shot at night and everybody goes, "What's that?" And then you shoot a second shot, they say, "Oh, it was over there." Well, you come in with 1 Huey and the bad guys are looking around, where did that go? And here you come with another one. So there's danger that it's going to more likely tell them where you have landed. At least they'll hear it.
When it says staccato, it comes with a promise. In any condition, at any moment, this gun is ready, because your life and the lives you protect depend on it. The future of the 2011 begins with the HD line. Narrower grip with no grip safety. You can run your pistol in either hand with fully mirrored controls and ergonomics. Uses widely available, reliable magazines in a variety of capacities, so you can stock up on more mags for less money. Allows common duty optics to be attached directly to the slide instead of to a plate. Staccato, engineered for performance, built for freedom.
The upside of going in with 1 Huey, those guys like to run with 6. The upside was you could squeeze them all in 1 Huey and go in, just touch, they're gone. Downside, if you took a seriously wounded man, you might make a last stand protecting him. As a rule, that I followed my entire time in SOG, if there's a wounded American, we never leave him, ever. We'll die before abandoning him. If there's a dead American, if at all, we can get him out. But we're not going to lose the whole team over a body. It's not, why lose living flesh over dead flesh? And maybe he can be recovered later by, we call them bright light teams, a bright light team that could come in and search for him, for his body. But I told that reality a number of times to special operations folks, especially in the Ranger battalions, where there was this, I don't want to mock it as a mentality, but there was this sincere belief that we all get out, never leave a man behind. Well, no, I didn't. But if you have to, you can leave a body behind if you absolutely have to. And that was hard to get them to accept because they've lived with this myth for so many years. Mm-hmm. Well, the situation is going to tell you. Can I leave? Once, while flying Covey, flying with the Air Force over Laos in support of our teams, I had to tell a team leader, you got to leave him behind. Otherwise, they all would have died.
Yeah. I want to ask you about your time flying Covey, too. You did so many amazing things. I think did you get there in 68? Is that when you first got to Vietnam?
Yes, sir.
68. And can you describe the difference between a 1-0 and a 1-1 for people?
Okay. We started explaining the size of teams. The 1-0 is a team leader. The 1-1 is the assistant team leader. The assistant team leader, we'd also call it tail gun because the team leader would be well toward the front, not usually walking point unless the indig were scared. Then being a leader, you go up front and show, come on, we're going to do this. But that tail gun would be the 1-1. When you had three Americans, that 1-2, 1-0, 1-1, and 1-2 was a radio operator. And he packed that heavy PRC-25 radio, which was, he was the only guy on the team that I never had carry a Claymore on top of whatever else it was carried because he was already burdened with that radio. We had a total of 12 men on a team, 3 U.S. and 9 indig. And the team leader decided how he was going to configure that for every mission. If he wanted to bring 5 indig, if he wanted to bring 6 indig, if he wanted to bring 9 indig, that was his decision alone. We never had command try to override and say, well, you're taking too many men or any silliness like that. You also, as a team leader, could arm them any way you wished. You give them all suppressed weapons, which nobody did that as far as I know. But the only requirement was going into Cambodia at that point that I was there, which you could not carry American weapons until 69, I think it was. In Laos, originally, they could not carry American weapons, but that only lasted about a year, 66. So you armed them the way you wanted, and you uniformed the way you wanted. As a rule, as a serious rule, we always wore sterile fatigues, no ranks, no names, nothing to associate with the United States. We left behind in a safe everything that we would have carried in our pockets, private things, ID cards, Geneva Convention cards, so on. Some guys took that uniform question a step further and outfitted their entire team in North Vietnamese uniforms. I liked to do that with my point man because you just that first 10 seconds of them seeing you, that buys you that first 10 seconds. So it's a tremendous advantage in a big gunfight versus we knew in that area, there were no indig just hanging around for the fun of it. The North Vietnamese occupied it. Tens of thousands of North Vietnamese. If you run into a human being carrying an AK, it was a bad guy, no doubt about it. So it gave you that little edge. Well, to take that edge even farther, there were guys that outfitted their entire team with AKs and RPG machine guns and pith helmets and NVA gear so that they really look like NVA. There was one, God, what's his name? He had blonde hair. He even went so far as to dye his hair black. And he ended up retiring as a 3-star Marine general.
Oh, wow.
He was an Army Spec 5, went to ROTC. He always wanted to fly. He could fly in the Marine Corps. And he was the CENTCOM Marine commander when he retired.
No kidding. Wow, I did not know that. So if you guys were going in and you didn't have your point man probably had an AK or an SKS when he's dressed like an NVA soldier. What would the rest of you have, or when you didn't have that point man that was dressed as NVA, were you carrying primarily the CAR 15s? Did anyone carry an RPD or something a little heavier as well in that lineup, or what were you armed with when you went across the border?
Well, that depended on the 1-0 entirely. I liked to go with 8 men, and I like to have 2 M79 Grenadiers when I had Montagnards, because those guys could really pump out the rounds. They could probably fire 8-10 rounds per minute, which is far above what the so-called book says, maybe 8 rounds a minute. And I liked all that fire going out. And there were lengthy 40 millimeter CS gas rounds that we had. And that was nice to throw CS in the bad guy's direction on occasion. However, there were some team leaders who thought they lost some of their basic firepower if they went with the single shot M79s. So they went to the 203. I think it was an M178 and then the 203 grenade launcher attached to 16 or CAR 15. Well, I didn't like it because it makes it, you aren't going to shoot well with the 40 millimeter, and it destroys the balance on the M16 or CAR 15. And you're getting the advantages for both weapons. Yeah. So some team leaders did indeed have a couple Grenadiers using 203s, but others, including a name that you may be familiar with, Daryl, former commander of Delta Force, went on to retire as a 2-star.
I'm blanking on the name too, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. But he was one of those who cut it down into a pistol.
Yep.
And he would have it.
Was it Eldon Bargewell? Did he do that?
Eldon Bargewell, yes. Eldon, which God bless his soul, he passed away 2 years ago. Great man. But anyways, he had an M79 sawed off. It was about that long, and unloaded, would carry it on a snap blank. And if needed, he had a few rounds with him, and he had more rounds among the team. Well, what was great was I had an image of his M79, sawed off M79. I was doing a briefing down at Fort Bragg, and I showed it. I explained its usefulness, yada, yada, yada. And I said, if you ever run into some person of rank who says you should not be modifying a weapon to make it more useful, go talk to Eldon Bargewell. By then it was General Bargewell, because that's his M79.
Nice.
He was a good egg.
I think he carried RPD as well for a little bit in there.
Yes. We modified RPDs.
Yeah.
Sawed off the barrel, cut it back, modified the drum so that instead of 100, it carried 125 rounds, which it was a non-delinking belt. So our guys figured out how to attach an extra 25 links. And that drum, as you're walking along, it might slap a little bit, and it makes a noise. This is real basic level stuff. They cut out a piece of linoleum, just the size of the drum, slid it in there so it was nice and snug, and it didn't make any noise. But that machine gun, which was their light squad machine gun, it was so well balanced. Once it was chopped down, it was incredible. In fact, Eldon Bargewell, when he got hit twice, for which he in engagement, which he received a DSC, he was using a sawed-off RPG.
Yeah.
RPD. But it was so balanced, you could almost write your name with it. And to have that, which they'd have at least one every other round tracer. Psychologically, you know what that does to the enemy. And somebody who's going, excellent combination. And it's proof that the Russians, Soviets, have some idiots in their development command, because they got rid of the RPD and replaced it with the, is it RPK?
Yes, there's
a modified AK with
PKM. There's
a magazine that's so long you can't go prone with it. But that RPD was an excellent machine gun. We really thought some of our teams that would go heavy, like Joe Walker or Ed Wolkoff, where they'd take out all 12 guys on their team. They think they could conquer the world, then, of course.
Wow.
And they would have at least one RPG rocket launcher.
Okay.
They were RPG 2s. They would have 2 RPD machine guns, and sometimes, well, both of them at times carried a 60 millimeter mortar that went off.
Ooh.
It had it on a sling.
Oh,
boy, I'll tell you. I would have one if I was on bright light duty, because we're going to go in loaded for bear. Where bright light means going in after a downed pilot, a team that's been overrun, somebody who's running for his life. So you wanted a lot of firepower. So I got to believe in that 60 millimeter. Joe Walker, with that 60 millimeter, God almighty, did he bring P upon them.
Wow.
Found a second career in CIA.
Oh, wow. Yeah, there are a few guys that went that route. Actually, it's part of the book that I'm writing right now. And in the prologue to that book, there's some RPD action, chopped RPD action that I described just the way you did with the extra 25 rounds, with putting the pad inside the drum so it doesn't rattle. So I'm trying to get all those details right. So it's all in that in the prologue to the upcoming book. And what are some of the other weapons that you remember? Because you guys had access to quite the armory.
Anything, just about anything. Early on, I know there was one guy running recon. We're talking 65, 66, and he was a World War II vet of, I think it was the Devil's Brigade. And he was an older guy, but he was SF. He was going to run, and he really wanted a Schmeisser 9mm German submachine gun, and somewhere Sog found him one. So he carried that. He was very happy with it, but he was old. And that stuff catches up with you fast because you're humping all day long, and you might have to outrun somebody who's younger, carrying less on their back. And that's a tough place to learn that you're a little old. So he honorably said, I don't think I should go because I can endanger my team. And under those circumstances, if someone said, after a certain number of missions, you start to think, karma. I've had too many successes. I've succeeded in too many gunfights. And it's going to get me. If you no longer could devote yourself to the mission and you had these other thoughts, you could easily go to command and say, recon company command and say, I've had enough. And they would respect that and put you in, let's say, the S2 shop, which is Intel S3 shop operations, or the S4 supply. And those guys understood what it was like to be on the ground. And they'd bend over backwards to get you whatever you needed, whether it was an unusual weapon, whether it was an expendable weapon, which there were some that were expendable. Well, actually, all of them were expendable. Not U.S. long arms, but handguns and so on. I remember one time I was flying with a Air Force OB-10 pilot, and I had a 38 shoulder holster and a 45 auto on my hip, and he said, geez, I would really like to have a 45. I said, here, you can have this one. He said, what? I said, well, I've only got 4 loaded magazines. One's tracer, so you can signal with it. Really? I said, sure. So I get back to FOB2, our compound at Contil. I walk into supply, and there's a farmer working. I said, hey, I need another 45. He says, what happened to your other one? I said, well, I gave it to a guy in the Air Force, pilot that I fly with. He said, okay, here's another one.
I love it.
You don't do that in conventional unit.
Yeah, you don't even do that in special operations anymore.
Oh, God. That takes a lot of the fun out of it.
It really does, especially when you grow up on those kind of stories. It gets you in a little bit of trouble these days, but you figure ways around it.
And experimenting with demo, and I could walk into supply and say, I want this and this and this kind of demo. Time pencils, C4 dynamite. That you don't even have to explain what it's for. They just go get it give it to you so I could go experiment with various kinds of charges.
It's fantastic.
It was no big deal.
And you mentioned those World War II veterans. At some point, it was the early 50s, the Lodge Act in the early 50s. So I think they were in special forces. I mean, it was across the military, but particularly in Army Special Forces. There were some quite a few characters, both officer and enlisted, that had fought for other militaries in World War II and end up in special forces. I think a lot of that was 10th Special Forces Group because of the Cold War and wanting people who could operate in a low visibility manner in the Eastern Bloc, East Germany, that sort of thing. But what do you remember about some of those guys that came over from through the Lodge Act that had fought in World War II?
Those guys usually didn't say a whole lot about what they did. I don't know of any former Nazis, anything like that. But it was incredible to then learn from someone that guy who's seemingly kind of old, working as a camp engineer and helping the yards build things out of concrete, that he was with the Czech resistance in World War II. And he only got out in 56 he's Hungarian. Only got out in 56 during the Hungarian Revolution, or Jacks. Major Frank Jacks. He had been with the Czech resistance as a young teenager. And these guys, can you imagine the perspective they brought?
Yeah.
Our first MIA in Laos was Larry Thorne, whose Finnish name was Lauri Torni. He had fought in the Winter War with the Russians when the Russians invaded in 1940. Did well at that. He fought them in what the Finns called the Continuation War, which is when Germany invaded Russia. The Finns wanted to get back the territory that the Soviets had taken away from them. So I know Torney led a group of like 100 ski troops that operated behind Russian lines, and he was so well respected. He was presented the Mannerheim Cross, which is the Medal of Honor for Finland. And he's admired today. I mean, his name is very well known in Finland. He came into Special Forces. He was the best ski instructor ever in the history of Special Forces. Served in Europe, came to Vietnam. Initially, it was with one of the A teams. Then he volunteered for SOG. And he was aboard a chase aircraft. It was an H-34. We also had a squadron of Vietnamese H-34s, unmarked, just black and green. And they came on early because they were deniable, because they weren't American. But he was riding in a chase aircraft, inserted the team, and he disappeared. The aircraft went down somewhere. Don't know if it was enemy fire or not. But they only recovered his body about 8-9 years ago. So he is in a grave. His remains are at Arlington.
Amazing. I take that story and I morph it a bit and I weave it into my latest novel. And then in the author's note at the end, I talk about in each of the books, starting with the fourth one, The Devil's Hand, I talk about what was real and what isn't in the pages that people just finished. And so I'll talk about that, what was real, what was morphed on that particular story. But wow, what a life that guy led. Just legendary.
Well, he also wore a German uniform.
I morphed that into. That part's really interesting.
Yes, it is. But because he was SS for a period of time, the Finns were ready to put him in jail for the rest of his life. Once the Soviets overran Finland and they surrendered, the new government, they called themselves neutral, but they better do what Moscow says. They were ready to put him in prison probably for the rest of his life. So he had to flee Finland. But while he was fighting in the Continuation War, their only ally was Germany. All they cared about really was throwing the Soviets out of Finland. Well, in order to get additional training and go to Germany for additional training, he had to be part of the SS. It was an SS school. I don't know that he was ever formally a member of the SS. I would be surprised if he was. But there are photos online of him in an SS uniform, and it is indeed Laurie Torney. I was thinking about the name he used back then. It is indeed Torney, but it's like a cheap shot to try to attack the man who was a fine warrior, fearless, which I'm not fearless. He was. I'm calculating.
That whole history is amazing.
Amazing warrior.
And if people have to understand the history to understand the context of what was going on and why he was sent, I think it was to Austria to a school specifically for sabotage and that sort of a thing,
yes,
because
exactly
of what
correct.
might have happened in Finland after the war and all these things. So it was with a purpose. But then world events change while he's there, I believe, and he ends up waiting to then surrender to the British but he happens to be in a German uniform, and so it's a very complicated thing. Eventually goes to Finland, and he is imprisoned. He escapes, gets imprisoned again, and then someone who fought with him in the continuation war is then on the staff of the new president, prime minister. Anyway, he ends up working his way down to South America and then stowing away, I think, or working his way as a seaman up to I think is it Miami? New York, and then going to into the Brooklyn community, essentially.
Oh, you know a lot about him.
But
that helped him get citizenship?
Donovan.
Very well done. You really impressed.
Wild Bill
Donovan, who had an OSS and WW2.
Yep, it's just so interesting. The whole thing is so interesting. Gets in the work permit and all of that, and it's just it's fascinating. Surprised it hasn't been turned into some sort of a film, but I give that background to one of the characters. I make him a commander at Fob 1 in the story with that background to kind of to weave that in there. But
well done,
incredible. Well, thank you. It's fun to do that stuff. I learn a lot, and trying to keep some of this history alive through the medium of popular culture, popular fiction. I liked when authors did that when I was growing up, and so I do the same. Now, your first mission, I think your first mission wasn't really your first mission. You were about to get on a helicopter, is that right? And then something happens.
Absolutely correct.
And you don't go on that mission, which ends up being an ill-fated mission. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I used to not talk about it, but I changed my mind a few years back, and it's out of respect for my teammates that people know who they were.
Yeah.
When I arrived at FOB2 at Kontum, which became CCC, when I arrived there, I was assigned to Recon Team New Mexico. And at that time, there was only one other American there, Stevens. And we weren't supposed to be scheduled to run a mission until one or more guys came back. They were down near Saigon attending a SOG school, a SOG recon school. So lo and behold, SOG, hey, the war goes on. I don't care what you were promised. You're going to get a mission because we need to have a mission run and you're available.
Yeah.
So we get scheduled for a mission. We train up. We go up to Dak To, which is the launch site for the helicopters that carried us across into Laos. And I've camoed up. We're waiting just for the fact, forward air controller, to tell us the weather's good and we're going to launch. And we just looked at our LZ, our landing zone. And I've topped off my canteens. We're all ready to go. And here came in a Huey that had just come out of Kontum. And two guys get off that I've never seen before, but they're all suited up and they've got all their grenades and magazines and so on. And my team leader, Stevens, walks over to them and talks to them for a minute. And he comes over and tells me, John, you can't. Those guys' names are Simmons and Bullock. So it's Stephen Simmons and Bullock. He says, John, you can't go on this one. Otherwise, I talked to the pilot, can't carry everyone. Otherwise, they'll be overloaded at this altitude. So he said, you're going to have to stay here. And I really, internally, I went, oh, shit. I really wanted to run that mission. It would have been my first, yada, yada. So instead of climbing on board the Huey with another Huey, the other guys, I just waved to them and went back to Kontum that evening. And the next morning, I got a runner came by team room, which I'm there staying all along. And he says, you're supposed to be over at Recon Company headquarters. Okay, I got over there. Bob Howard, who later was a Medal of Honor recipient, said, John, your team was overrun last night. They are lost, all of them. And indeed, a bright light went in and recovered all 3 bodies. That was my first recon team, which from that point forward, I just assumed that I was going to be killed running recon. And that made it easier for me, because once you start fearing, oh my God, that could have happened to me, just pretend. You're going to die for sure, so get on with it. And that was what I learned from that. I'll never forget them. Even Bullocks and Simmons, I only knew my teammates for 10 minutes. That was a hard introduction to running recon in Laos.
Wow. I've heard you say also that you knew when you got to Vietnam and got to SOG that you were in the exact place that you were supposed to be.
Yes.
That was, you knew it. And I heard you say that, and it's interesting because I felt the same way in Iraq, in Ramadi in 05, 06. I knew that this is the place that I'm supposed to be. And also very similarly, IED threats going up at that point. Anything can blow up, whether it's a dead animal on the side of the road, a pothole, or whatever it might be. Anything can be an IED at this stage of the war in Iraq and all the way through it, really. But if you fixated on that, I found, same thing. Now you're fearful and you're looking at that pothole, you're looking at that donkey, you're looking at that other vehicle, you're looking at, and that's all you're doing when, especially as a leader, you have your responsibility to those guys that you're taking into combat here, and you have other people up there in the turret in a gun truck who are looking at. That's their job to look at that. You have some countermeasures, and you're doing some other things as well to mitigate the threat. But I thought about that, and I thought, you know what, fate. I'm just going to think about this as fate. There's a book, for a short one, called The Bridge at San Luis Rey, older book. And I forget how many people are on this bridge, though, in South America. And let's say it's 7. And they're on there, and the bridge collapses, and they all die. And really, the book is about fate. What brought those 7 people to that bridge on that day, at that time, for this thing to collapse? And so that was very freeing. And so I understand what you're saying when you say that you thought you were going to not make it, and that it seems like you're saying that freed you up to be the best SOG soldier you could possibly be.
At the best I could possibly be. There's another factor. One of our chief SOGs, Jack Singlog, who retired as a 2-star, absolutely the best during World War II. He was OSS, and he was on the teams that operated behind enemy lines in occupied France. He parachuted in. Well, he said that master your weapons, absolutely master them, so that whatever the situation, you're confident that you can take care of it. And that way you're really just focusing on your mission. We shot every time we had the opportunity, every day that we had the opportunity. We had our own range, short distance down the road. And if I didn't have the team out shooting, we were dry firing on the compound, immediate action drills. And without question, 0 question, that tactic, that immediate action, whatever the immediate action drill was, being able to put out effective fire at an instant, focused on the enemy, saved just about every contact a SOG team ever had.
What a legend that guy was. He makes an appearance in the book. Almost, you could call it a cameo. Almost. I have 2 guys go to Saigon, and they have a little passing in the hallway. Essentially, it's in an office, but they meet him, and that's really just to get his name out there and his background out there, because it's so fascinating, and especially what these guys did that went from the OSS into Army Special Forces and were part of that history. I mean, what an amazing lineage, and these guys were incredible.
this. I had nothing but respect
Yeah.
for General Singlon, but I actually got to know him after the.
Oh, really?
Yeah, one-on-one. And, he died just a couple of years ago, and he was 100 years old.
I saw that when doing the research for this book.
Okay.
Yeah. Incredible. Incredible. What did he do after he got out of the military?
Well, interesting thing is, how did he get out of the military? He was the deputy commander in South Korea. This is during the Carter administration. And he had his second star. The Carter administration had announced that they were withdrawing U.S. forces from Korea, which there goes whatever deterrence we have against the North. So some reporter interviewed Singlon and asked what would the effect of that be. Singlon, being a trusting and honest kind of guy, tells him that it will cause another war because the North Koreans have been waiting for the opportunity, and as quickly as we're gone, they'll do it. Well, that reporter, Washington Post, wrote it up, and supposedly it was the editor who decided that the significance of that story was who said that. Despite, off the record, they published its name. So he gets a flash from Washington that Carter wants to see him immediately, President Carter. And Singlon gets on a plane, a civilian plane, flies to Japan, changes aircraft, and now he's flying back to the States, and there's a woman sitting next to him. And they're just chatting about this and that, and she's asking, where are you going? He's not in uniform. Where are you going? Well, I have to go back to Washington. And he tells a story somewhat, and you really think it's going to cause a war to do that? And I hate to see it, but yes. She was a fucking reporter who had bribed somebody to get the seat beside him. Mm-hmm. And again, they exposed him. So that first time was bad enough. Second time, Carter concluded it was a direct effrontery to him as commander-in-chief. That ended his career.
Wow. I did not know that.
Yeah. And also he was involved in raising money for the Contras.
Oh, later under the Reagan administration?
Oh, yes.
Wow. Yeah, those guys, I mean, when you have him and a Colby and like all these characters, it's just a fascinating time, that end of World War II up through the Reagan administration, for the most part, living through the church hearings and everything there. Church hearings. Going
Colby
through
was a fool during the church hearings. He offered them a lot of information they never asked for.
Interesting. And being there in let's say the 50s and the 60s, kind of the heyday of intelligence, where we're figuring it out, the intelligence services, and learning all these lessons. And what an amazing time to be in that world. And also a lesson to those listening: beware the off the record comment. There's no such thing.
Yes. Look what happened to the commander in Afghanistan. Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But he didn't ask for it off the record. His staff foolishly said whatever they wanted in the presence of that Rolling Stone reporter.
Yeah.
That was stupidity. And that's stupidity on everyone's part.
And it's interesting. I think they were delayed. I might be a little off here, but I think the general scheme here is correct, that their plane was delayed because was it in Iceland that had a volcanic eruption or something like that? So you couldn't fly. So they had to go overnight somewhere else, and that's when they hit the bar and had gotten a little too comfortable, I think, with this guy.
Loose lips.
It's a saying for a reason. Yeah.
That was McChrystal.
McChrystal.
McChrystal, yes.
Stanley McChrystal
yes.
Group. Yeah.
And never met him.
It happens. And so after what happened to that first team, RT New Mexico, what is your next mission, or how does it feel after that first team gets overrun? So now you're getting on another helo to go in for the first time. What does that feel like?
I was about 2 weeks before I was on another team, Recon Team Illinois. And we were going in after a B-52 strike. These are called bomb damage assessment, BDAs. Mm-hmm. I have to tell you the truth. I wasn't that bothered. Maybe someone would have been really apprehensive, and I wasn't drunk and I wasn't on drugs. But you put that stuff out of your mind and you focus on your mission. I would have understood. But be advised, it emotionally affected me. That night I wept, and I swore to God that I'd never forget those teammates. But as far as running missions, once in a while I was out on the ground, especially in a hazardous situation where it's about to erupt or it's already erupting, we're running for our lives, I tell myself, John, you stupid son of a bitch, you don't have to be doing this. Why are you're going to get yourself killed? But other than that, once in a while, it's pretty much mission focused, especially when you become a team leader. Because if you're a good team leader, you focus on your team, not on yourself. The team is you. And you don't have time, if you're doing the job, you don't have time to dwell upon your emotions, dwelling upon, has everyone got a claymore in their rock? Are they in good position for this ambush, et cetera, et cetera? You don't have time to be focusing on yourself. In fact, Lowell Wesley Stevens, retired Sergeant Major, absolutely one of the finest guys I ever knew in Special Forces. He once, over a beer, explained to me the priorities: mission, men, self. Have you probably heard that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, mission, men, self. And you have to change that according to the situation. Mission is always number one. However, if your troops are out of water and they're not going to be able to make it the rest of the march, you better put troops first and find some water. And if you haven't had sleep in 3 days, and maybe it's time to put yourself number one and then restore. Mission is number one. But Lowell Wesley Stevens drilled that. Well, all he had to tell me was once, but that was the best way I knew to express that relationship.
You know, I love that you said that, because there are some things kind of like that, what you said earlier, that never leave a man behind, that becomes a mantra, and you repeat it and you hear it and you read it so many times that it becomes law that cannot bend depending on a situation. And that's when you get people killed. And I like that you say this, because people say the same thing about the men, the mission, me. Mission, men, me. Mission, 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 mission. But as you just so articulately described it, that needs to be fluid depending on the situation. And a good leader knows how to do that. The art of leadership right there. So I love that you said that, because during my time, I never would say it, because everybody would keep saying this mission, mission, mission thing. And I kept thinking, if my guys know that I am genuine when I talk about, or through my actions show how much I care for them, whether it's in garrison or on the battlefield or in training, then that mission is going to get accomplished, because they trust me, and that they know that I am on my quote unquote off time. I never really thought of it as off time. It's just a lifestyle, I guess. I don't really like that word, but a way of life, really. So anytime I am off, I am reading about Iraq, Afghanistan, special operations, low intensity conflict, culture, history, warfare in general. So I'm always doing that. Or I'm going to train with people on the civilian side of the house that are, hey, this guy's best with a 1911. Oh, I'm going to go train with that person. Hey, here's someone who's a shotgun guy. I'm going to go train with that guy. I'm going to drive to Arizona. I'm going to drive to Oregon. I'm going to drive to Nevada on my quote unquote off time. And people see you doing that, and you genuinely do it because you want to be the best leader and the best operator that you possibly can. So if they believe you're doing that for them, not yourself, then that mission is going to, by default, take that priority, because you're focused on the well-being and the care of your men. And so anyway, so I love that you said that. That was my point. I love that you said that. It has to be fluid, because I never hear people talk about that. And I really respect that you thought that way and said that.
You cited again, leaving a man behind. And I told you that once when I was flying with the Air Force, which I spent a year flying with the Air Force solely in support of ground operations, SOG ground operations, and had that terrible day when I had to tell a team leader, leave him behind. The yards had run off and left them because they got so scared. Rare for yards to do that, but it happened. So it was only the team leader and his radio operator, who was badly wounded, and the dead 1-1 who had been hit with an RPG, went down fighting. He took out the bad guy with the RPG just as he went down. But I had him finally get moving, and we got him out alive. 40 years later, he's still ridden with guilt for having done that. He did what was necessary, and I told him he had to do it. But compassion, you care about your teammates.
Yeah, you really do. Man, it's so tough.
And by the way, I did the eulogy at his funeral a couple years ago. He passed away.
Yeah. And that first mission where you go on to do that battle damage assessment, the BDA.
Yes.
What do you remember from that mission? What happened on that mission?
Well, we did not make contact and gathered intel as to, did the bombs hit the right place and the craters? Did we find any dead enemy and so on? What we did find was what had been probably an enemy, dispensary, dug in a lot of enemy positions that had been well dug in. And in there were Canadian flashlight batteries, which the Canadians traded with North Vietnam during the war.
Oh, interesting.
But only what they called non-military supplies. Well, the North Vietnamese found use for the batteries, didn't they?
Oh, sure.
And North Korean penicillin.
Huh.
And now that I think about it, we also recovered a replacement barrel. Sometimes you have to hot load replace barrels on machine guns. And it was for like a 1935, is it a dictograph?
I don't know.
Okay, but
wow.
So I got
I'm going to look it up after this, though.
Here's my war trophy.
Wow.
The Air Force was happy because all the bombs went there they were supposed to, and it had been an occupied area. Sometimes, though, after a strike, bad guys just get up and run in all directions, get out of there. And sometimes they knew in advance that a B-52 strike was coming in. There is a myth in the war that the Russians, the Soviets, had ships. There's a misconception that Russian trawlers offshore from Guam, which is where good number of the B-52s were based, would warn that the B-52s had taken off. And somehow the bad guys would therefore figure out that they had to all go to deep shelter. That's not true. What was true is, now you were commo man. Do you know what guard frequency is?
I heard the term, but I forget what it is.
243 megahertz. Oh. That guard frequency, every U.S. aircraft has a separate radio just for guard. It's monitored all the time they're in the air, so that if you're in an emergency in another aircraft, all you have to do is to turn it to 243, and everybody within range will hear it. Early in the war, there were occasions where B-52 strikes were not well known to aircraft flying cross-border, and they'd fly into a B-52 strike. Happened a couple times early. So, U.S. adopted a policy, and this is, I'm sure, Macv level, that prior to a strike going in, all the aircraft would be notified in that area. And they did it on 243 megahertz, which is the same guard channel. It would come up. You're just flying along, and we were flying Covey in Laos. Attention, attention. Heavy artillery warning on the 27 radio from channel 62. Channel 62, or whatever it was, would always be like Playco Air Force Base. all you had to do was plot whatever radio it was and the distance. You didn't have to be a genius at all. And the North Vietnamese, we know for sure, had a number of emergency radios, which were frequency 243 hertz. You know, if pilot goes down, he's got his emergency radio.
Yeah.
All our Americans, SOG had emergency radios. They sometimes use those to try to draw in aircraft coming to rescue someone so they could shoot at them. They take her off a body and use them. For sure, the North Vietnamese had them. That, I am positive, is how they knew the locations of B-52 strikes. I never read that anywhere, but that's the truth.
Interesting, because I had read that about the Soviet trawlers out there. So I had read that somewhere before, but that's interesting to know that that's not the case.
Very interesting. And someone, it was the only system they could come up with, I'm sure.
Very interesting. Was SOG, do you think SOG was compromised at different levels in Saigon through the South Vietnamese? Absolutely.
Which we just had too many coincidences where a team would be going in and the bad guys would be there waiting for them at their insert LZ. One of our Halo teams was either the first or second Halo team. We had 5 Halo jumps, SOG, for infiltration. These are the first combat Halo jumps in the world. And it must have been the first one, because for the first one, the NSA itself was tasked to purposely listen for anything compromising about this jump. And they canceled it at the last minute because the North Vietnamese are, and I know this is absolutely true. You hear some of these bullshit stories third hand. No, this one is absolutely true. NSA intercepted communication to that area of Laos, telling them to beware Americans were jumping in. And that is their likely location for landing the drop zone.
Jeez.
Well, then they rescheduled it, and it was Americans only. They really reduced distribution. Problem was that SOG, like some higher commands in Vietnam, had a relationship with their Vietnamese called counterparts, which was a myth because sometimes the counterparts weren't counterparts at all. They were careerists putting money on the side. They were corrupt. They were themselves enemy agents. And I know that there was a serious attempt to track down at Saigon who it was. I talked to Chief SOG Sadler about this, that he first had all the Americans go on a box, be polygraphed. And he could then go to his Vietnamese counterpart and say, your turn. But the answer from the Vietnamese was, we'll take care of that ourselves.
Of course.
I don't know if they had any polygraph capability. Yeah. After the war, it turned out that there was at least one of them in SOG headquarters. But late in the war, I learned that in Saigon, near Tan Son Air Force Base, was a Vietnamese headquarters called the Liaison Bureau for very high-level coordination. And SOG headquarters, would give those guys info about our teams, where their areas of operations were going to be and so on. And that was not just one or two guys. God knows where it would get out. So from that point, we adopted as individual team leaders, talking to your cubby riders, the SOG guys who flew the Air Force. Listen, whatever grid I give you, I'm going to be 2 clicks north and 1 click east, or something like that. So we had our own little system going. But definitely, absolutely, definitely, people were probably killed because of that. But the politics of the war and the politics of getting along with the high-level headquarters of the Vietnamese compromised our people. That's the first time I know of in American history where that kind of information was shared with the same nationality as your enemy.
Interesting. Interesting. I think you talk about it in this book, actually, in this one, which is amazing, by the way. I mean, all these are incredible. They need to be on everyone's bookshelf. But I think you talk about one of those high level spies on the staff in this one. You can see my notes for the for the book right here that I'm writing right now. So in the author's note and acknowledgments, of course, I will be talking about you and your work, and this is amazing.
Did you have a chance to read the Presidential Unit Citation?
I sure did. Yeah, right there. Right there. I think it's right in the beginning, right? You have it right. Yeah, there it is.
Yes.
Yeah, there it is right there.
Yeah.
Incredible. Man.
We did not receive that till 1991.
Wow. And is that because...
Excuse me. 2000.
2000. Yeah. I mean, incredible. And that's, here we go. North Carolina, 1 April 2001. Jeez. It's just incredible.
But Special Operations Command gave us a lot of courtesy. Even though just about all of our guys are no longer on active duty, they had a special assembly of perhaps 250 SOG vets, and the 3-star general commanding USARSOC, U.S. Army Special Operations Command, did the ceremony for all of us. Wow. And, patriotic music. They even minted a special coin for that day.
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool.
Jeez. It is very cool.
And thank you for sending me this book, by the way.
You're very welcome.
This is so special. And I'm so glad that a lot of you guys didn't follow the rules when it came to taking photos over there.
Well, everybody saved one or two. As did I.
As it should be.
And actually, unless it explained what it was, you didn't know it was across the border. You didn't know whether that was American with that or what. When I first wrote the SOG history, the one published by Simon & Schuster, which is still available in SOG.
Right here.
There it is. When I wrote that, I'd already interviewed like 100 guys that I tracked down from SOG. But when that was published, and the guys knew I was straight, I was a former recon man, covey rider myself, I could contact them and they'd loan me a few of those photos that you should never have. And that is where the photos came from SOG.
Amazing.
A Photo History of the Secret War. I think there's 700 photos in there.
They're incredible photos. Incredible. I'm using, all of your books I am using as research. I've already read them all, but now I'm going back. And at first I was reading them like this one as a brand new guy in the SEAL teams. I'm reading it because I read everything I can possibly find on special operations, military warfare. What lessons can I learn? And then apply going forward. And now I'm reading them again for the book that I'm writing right now. Just incredible. But this one over here, actually, the sniper, I want to ask you about this a little bit later, actually, but since we're talking about the books, this one right here, I grabbed it off the shelf and I was like, oh, what is in here? And I thought, oh, there's maybe some notes I took or something. And I read this whole thing cover to cover in Uzbekistan, not long after 9/11. And because I was teaching the Dragunov and in Uzbekistan, because I was a sniper, enlisted still at the time. And I was like, oh, geez, I've never even fired one of these things. Now I got to teach it. Of course, some of the principles are the same, but
welcome to special operations.
Exactly. But the scope that goes with that sniper weapons system, very unique, very, very interesting. And so I learned a lot about it, of course, beforehand, and then getting my hands on it once I was there. We're there for a little bit, but this was in there. So this must have been, and I don't even remember, it looks like, it's Uzbek, maybe Russian up there, writing on the side of that target right there.
Could you a little more light on it?
Boom, how about that?
There.
So I guess this is what we used to sight in the Dragunov back then.
Oh, very cool.
But yeah, interesting. So that was in your book that I read on the way there, and then while I was there, but cover to cover. Right here, the ultimate sniper. And I want to talk about how you got into all of that, but your first mission that you made contact in. What was that like? What's your first firefight like in Vietnam?
Okay, I was still on Recon Team Illinois. Ben Thompson was team leader. Interestingly, a really, really fine guy, George Bacon III, was on the team. He had been shot up on August 23rd of 1968 when the North Vietnamese staged a major sapper attack on CCN headquarters up in Da Nang. We lost more Special Forces Green Berets on that occasion than any other time in their history. Yeah. Well, George had taken an AK round. He was not taken out of country. He was not medevaced, but he recovered. So a few months later, this is like February of 69 now. So he's on our team. He'd already had experiences so on, but George, being George, said, hey, I'll be the one too. I'll carry the radio. It's no big deal. We went in, sit down. Well, we say sit down LZ, but rarely did they ever actually sit. They'd hover low enough that you could jump off. Made our way to a wood line per SOP. We just listened. The helicopters fly away and it's quiet again. All the aircraft fly away. And we just listen for about 10 minutes. No sign of anything. You don't hear anything. You give Covey, the flying forward air controller, team okay. And then you start your mission. We had only gone like 200 yards beyond the LZ and bumped head on into a number of North Vietnamese. I can't say for sure how many. There were at least maybe 10, maybe more. Could have been a platoon. So right away they open up as our point man opens up, and the point man takes an AK round right through his left bicep. And so the team leader grabs him and he's leading him back. And he looks over at me and he says, because I'm the I'm the assistant team leader now. He said, hold him off. Because he knows it's going to take a while to get back to the LZ. So I've got my suppressed Swedish K and I'm staying there and George is with me. I say, get out of here. He says, no. I said, George, what are you, some kind of John Wayne? He says, no, I'm George Bacon III, and I'm going to stay right here. Okay. And by now, the bad guys are screaming out there. We're throwing grenades and we're shooting. And that was the occasion when I actually did knock down a bad guy with a Swedish K, hit him with a couple of rounds in the chest. And a short while later, I looked back at the spot. He wasn't there anymore. Very dangerous. So that is what sold me on 9mm hardball not being the ideal round to carry in combat. And it's up to George Bacon and myself to hold off the bad guys long enough for them to get back to the LZ. That takes between 5 and 10 minutes where we're having running gunfights. The bad guys, North Vietnamese, are pretty aggressive. And when we do reach it, by now some gunships are overhead because they weren't that far away, and started strafing rather close around us, close enough that their ejected 7.62 brass was falling upon us, and I actually got a hot brass down my shirt. For a split second, I felt that burn. I thought I might have been hit, but I wasn't. Now, further, when we finally do get an extraction helicopter there, we get the guys on board, the wounded guy and so on. George is coming up later. And as we're lifting off, here comes a round to the bottom of the aircraft. And our indigenous team leader, Vietnamese, took an AK round right lower back through his belly. So he was in terrible shape. He survived, but he was on a bag for 3 months, 6 months after that. And the point man who took that AK, by the time they got done debriding that, it was like half his bicep was gone. He stayed in after that, but he continued to run recon, but that pretty well ended war operations for him. So that was my first in which we made contact with the enemy. I figured it out one time, and during my days running recon, we had 19 occasions where my team and yours truly were shooting it out with bad guys. Very fortunate because, well, the only wound I got was a grenade fragment in the knee. And that one would have killed me if that would have been an American grenade. Fortunately, it was probably a Chinese, which I don't know. That generation's Chinese was like our World War II pineapple grenades.
Okay.
Cast metal, did not break uniformly, and it didn't have very good predictable results versus our grenades had that steel wire that would fragment. If it had been one of our, with much more explosive, if it would have been one of ours, would have killed me on the spot.
You know, something else I learned from you was about someone got a wound where their intestines were exposed.
Yes.
And you used your canteen to keep those intestines moist.
That's absolutely correct. Yes.
So I'll mix it into the book. I don't want to give too many surprises away from the upcoming book, but there's
your intestines become like potato chips. A consistency like that, if they dry. So you got to keep them moist.
Was that mission, or was it a different mission?
It was that mission, yes, sir.
Okay.
Which I was pouring. Wasn't High? It was. God, the point man was. His name was High, H-A-I. Could have been Ben, but nevertheless, that's true. Pouring canteen water on it.
Wow.
This episode of the Danger Close podcast is brought to you by
Cry Havoc. From New York Times #1 best-selling author Jack Carr. Cry Havoc, a Tom Reece thriller. Order now.
Watch a Cry Havoc teaser here or watch another episode of the podcast.